And hello, everyone. Welcome to Sister to Sister. It's Trish Carr once again. Every Tuesday, we get together for a conversation about what really people experience when it comes to racism. We have all of these philosophical conversations about what's white privilege and what it's like to be a person of color and systemic racism. And we talk about these things as concepts, but the reality is that people of color deal with racism on a regular basis. And those of us who were born white, socialized white, we just don't see it. So, this broadcast is all about simply sharing experiences as to what people deal with so that all of us collectively can be allies to be anti racist, to identify those areas that we can do something about. So I'm really pleased to have my friend with me today, Barbara Beckley. And Barbara Beckley, she lives in Wisconsin, but
Yeah,
she's in the Chicagoland area.
yeah.
So she told me today that snow is on its way.
Yes, unfortunately, they're telling us between 6 to 12 inches
Oh,
in the
wow.
evening. Yes,
I'm
I'm
so glad.
crying.
I'm so glad I live in Florida.
Good. Stay, stay.
It is. It is. Barbara was the first Women's Prosperity Network chapter leader in the Chicagoland area, and she was really the trailblazer there. So I thank you so much for that because we still have dozens and dozens of people from the Chicagoland area, and you continue to send them to us, which is wonderful.
Yes. Oh, yes, yes. I'm a WPN member, Sister for Life.
Yes, yes, yes. And Barbara's a really cool lady. She really is.
Um,
She's a professional keynote speaker. She's a four-time best-selling author. She likes to use the term she's a purpose strategist, which I really like that as well. And she's a social media personality. As a matter of fact, her show, The Diamond Factor Experience, 21,000 views you just found out you had last
yes,
week, right?
yes, yes, I did. I'm still on
21,000.
in cloud nine right now, Trish.
Yeah. Well, and the show is a great show, and you do it several times a week, which is really great. And I'm excited that I'm going to be one of the people who are going to be on there regularly. But
Yes.
what I love about you talk about the diamond factor, and you say it's because
Mhm.
everyone has something special within them, that diamond factor. And that's your foundation to courage, to move you forward despite trials and tribulations. And you've had quite a few of them. When we were talking about doing this broadcast,
Mhm.
I had no idea. I knew you were a cancer survivor. I didn't realize it's 9 years already.
Yeah, it's been
That's
nine
really
years.
that's really
Yeah.
awesome. But you've also gone through lots of trials and tribulations. You survived sexual abuse. Your father being murdered when you were 17 years old.
Yeah. My rock. Yeah, he was
Your
my rock.
rock, the man who was everything to you. So, you're a real testament to the power of tapping into that diamond within yourself. And you make a difference for other people by helping them see their skills, helping them see their purpose. And encourage all of you to check out the Diamond Factor Experience show. And it's right here on Facebook, so you can always get there. So thank you, Barbara Beckley, for being with me. I really appreciate you.
Well, thank you. I love your title, to sister, because I look at you all the time. You and Nancy as my sisters, and I'm loving how you present the show so you can have some real talk, and really get into it so people understand. And I always tell people communication is the key. So this is a beautiful platform to do that on.
Well,
So
thank
I
you. And
commend you
I
for
didn't know what to do. I knew I had to do something.
it.
And I
Silent
knew that I just couldn't stand by. And I mean, going to the marches and things like that, great. But I thought with this platform that we could just inform people
Mhm.
because, I would get into conversations around things like white privilege, and people would argue with me that it even existed. And I said, whether you
Mhm.
think it exists or not, let me give you some realities of what happens in people's lives. And
Yeah.
your dad was white,
Yeah. Yeah.
which that brought its own complications, right?
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking again this morning because I knew we were going to talk today, and I was going back in time because that was a time of era. What was that? Was in the 60s, 70s when my mother and father got together, and that was a whole nother world. I mean, of acceptance that wasn't there for them. So
Yeah.
even my mother went through a lot with her own identity because after she met my dad and she met his friends and basically she was the only black woman in the whole the crew that they had. But the wonderful thing about that is most of them all accepted her, but she felt like, and now that I'm thinking about this, just thinking back when I got older and she told me stories, and she said I always felt like I had to be just kind of be more, even though they accepted me, I was still the black woman in the group, and I knew I had to show and either be bold and strong or be timid. So she picked being bold and strong, and said, no one's not going to walk over me. This and she was just like that, which I'm glad she was because she taught me how to get to that point when I was getting older and getting into school and business and stuff like that. So yeah, they had their time, even though, and when they got married, she told me a story about how his parents was so much against it. I mean, they was just like, "Are you really doing this? What are you doing? You're breaking up our family." Because he had 3 brothers and 2 sisters, and the youngest of his brothers understood because they were in that, like, I call it the flower child era and everything. So
Right.
they were like, let's show the love. We want to, everybody love each other and stuff. And then his older sister and his parents were like, this is not, this is going to embarrass us.
Yeah.
So, and then when I came along, that was a whole nother, but the nice part about it is, Trish, that when I was growing up, we lived on the north side of Chicago. So that basically I was going to school with all minorities, black, white, Mexicans, everybody. So I never really felt the heat of it that much of racism because I was around everybody. I mean, you had some children that were like, looked at you like, I don't want to deal with you or whatever. But that was just like when you grow up as a kid, that's what happens. Some people don't like you. The boy that likes you a lot, they'll hit on you, they'll pull your ponytail. You know how that goes.
Right.
But they're like, I don't like you, but they really like you. So I was going through that little experience. But what really the first time that it home, hit home hard for me is I turned the age of 11 and my dad just took me because he said, we're going to get our first home. And we were all excited. He had all the paperwork was ready. All we had to do was go to the bank and he had to sign some papers and we had our own home. So we went to the bank and we walked in the door and the security guard looked at my dad and me and he's like, is this little girl causing you trouble? Is she, does she, is she, he looked at me, he's like, you're not supposed to be here. We can get you can get in trouble for this. And my dad looked at him, he's like, that's my daughter. What are you talking about causing trouble? This is my daughter. So then they looked at him and like, like, what? This is your daughter? He said, they were like, okay. He said, so the guard asked, well, what's your needs and everything? He said, I'm here to talk to the banker. I'm closing on my house today. Excuse you. I mean, that's what my dad basically said, excuse you. And I'm going where I need to go. So he grabbed my hand. We walked to the banker, sat down in the seat, and the banker looks at my dad. And he's like, how can I help you? And again, didn't know. He looks at me, the banker, are you babysitting today? Is that babysitting? And my dad looks again like, he said, this is my daughter, period. He
Yeah.
said, I shouldn't have to explain this again. He's like, well, I didn't, then the bank got a little, he was like, I didn't know, I'm sorry, whatever. Now, the only thing he had to do to go there is sign papers. Everything was done. They did all the references, everything. All he had to do was sign. Well, that day they found something to stop the closing from happening. And my dad was just like, okay, you have my credentials, you check credit. I've been working for the company for 20 something years. What is going on? And he's like, well, we just found some things just happened today. I'm sorry, we're not gonna be able to close on your house. You're gonna have to go to another bank.
So this was in the 70s, Barbara?
Yeah, this was in the 70s.
So
Yeah,
that was like the height of redlining right
yeah,
then.
yeah, yeah. And that day, he walked out, he said, you know what? I don't want to do business with people that are racist anyway. So he said, come on, Barbara, let's go. And we
Wow.
walked out that bank. And then that's when it hit the first time.
Well, and you're 11 years old, so I'm thinking as an 11-year-old child, I'm sure you were like, what's going on here? And how did
Yeah.
that leave you? Like,
I think about it, and now when we got to the car, because my father was just so upset, which I understand. And he looks at me and he's like, "Are you okay?" And the first thing I asked him was, "So we're not gonna get the house?"
yeah,
It was like I didn't think about the part that they didn't think I was his daughter and everything at the time. It was like more so like the house is gone. What's going on? We're gonna move in the house. So then he looked at me and he hugged me. He said, "We're gonna get the house. It's just not gonna be with them. It's
yeah.
just not gonna be with the bank."
Well, and
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, and at that time, when we got home, he explained to me, well, he explained to my mother, and she was wanting to go back to the bank because I told you she was Mrs. like, what are they talking about? So she was ready to go to the bank and just go off on everybody. And then my dad sat me down, explained to me that you're gonna go through some things in life different than what I go through just because of the color of my skin. And he said, I want to apologize to you because I should have taught you this a little bit earlier than now. And he said, it's sad that I have to sit you down to explain this to you because I don't care, Barbara, if you're Black, you are special. And that's where the diamond came in at because he always used to say I was a diamond in the rough. And he said, I don't care what anybody says, what everybody does. You are special, you have knowledge, you are smart, and don't let anybody stop you from that. Anybody. So he would encourage me and tell me that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, you can debate whether he should have had the talk
It's
earlier, but the way I see it is why not let you live your life, and when you have to deal with it, right? Why put that in your back of your mind? Hey, watch
mm,
out, because that's going to
yeah.
skew everything from that point on. So
Mhm.
you he did the right thing. You talk about, here's something really interesting from my perspective as a white woman growing up. Now, I grew up in New York,
Okay.
Brooklyn, New York.
Hmm.
And I too went to school. Actually, I had fewer Black people in my school, more Puerto Rican,
Okay.
a lot of Puerto Rican, and a lot of Black people too. But it was interesting that there was mostly more Puerto Rican in terms of minorities, if you will.
Hmm.
And when I was probably the same age, around 11, my mom took me to a friend's house and she was married to a Black man. And that was my first experience. And I thought it was so unusual. But I can
Hmm.
tell you, since I've been doing the show, it wasn't unusual. We just, for some reason, I didn't see it. I lived in a white neighborhood, right? I went to, my area was, and unless I was in school, my school was downtown Brooklyn. So I, I've met so many of my sisters who
Hmm.
have come from a biracial background. And I never
Hmm.
knew because I'm thinking, well, 60s and 70s, I guess that's when people really started making it happen because the laws changed, certainly,
Hmm.
like it was
Yes.
illegal at one time.
Hmm.
But one of the things that I heard from a guest a couple of weeks ago, Stacy, said that her mom is white
Hmm.
and Jewish, and her dad is
Hmm.
Black, and her mom's family did not want anybody to know that their grandchildren were Black, and she used to have to tell them. She would say, if anybody asks you, your mom is here babysitting you. So you mentioned about your mom and how she felt she had to be one better, and whatever they do, I have to do even better. What was
Hmm.
the acceptance level on the other side? Like your dad bringing home a Black woman.
Well, like I said, with his parents, it was, and but then his brothers that were younger, they accepted with open arms, and
Mhm.
his friends accepted my mother with open arms. I mean, there was, you used to have the one or two, but the majority they really accepted it a lot. Now this is the part that was really crazy to me. Now on my mother's side, with her family, one of her sisters accepted my dad, but everybody else was like, "Are you crazy? You're gonna get in trouble, and how could you do this? And now you're making our family look crazy." So they, on the other hand, they were kind of upset at my mother too. So there was like on both sides
Yeah.
you had some, and then you had more on my mother's side saying, how could you do this? But my mother had a rough life with her family too. She was raised in Mississippi, and they sent her to Chicago at a very, very, very early age, where she didn't want to go on her own. And she went through some things. So that kind of made her not have that connection with the family that well. And then when they all moved to Chicago,
Yeah.
at that time, she was kind of doing her thing. She started going to school, and then she was meeting other people. And then when her and my dad met, because they met, it's funny, they met she was working in a factory, and he was one of the supervisors. So they used to talk at lunchtime, and they used to sneak off because, at the time
Right.
he didn't want to cause her problems in either way. So it came to a point where they started really talking to each other. He took her out at night and on to dinner and stuff. And then he finally said, you know what? I feel like we're both having the same feelings here. I know we work at the same place, and I don't want to cause you any problems. And she's like, well, no, we can still do what we're doing. We'll just at lunchtime, we'll sneak, she was just like, well, do we have to do until, it's whatever. And he just stood up and he told his manager, he's like, well, I'm going to be proposing to a lady here that works in the factory, and she's Black. And I just want to let you know beforehand, because if something's going to happen, at least I told you before anybody did. So at that time, they didn't like that. And first of all, they said you shouldn't be having engagement with,
Right.
people at
An
the job,
employee.
employee. And then secondly, she's Black. So they said, well, you know what, we might have to. And he said, that's okay. You don't have to fire me. I quit. He said, I quit. So he quit, and they got married. And he's like, and he got another job. And he's like, you know what, my living, having somebody, the one that I love in my life, is more important than this job. So he told him.
Here, here to your dad.
Yeah, he really, at an era like that, he really was standing strong in what he believed in.
Good
And
for
and
him.
that's always in my mind every time I think of things that I'm doing, is that he really stood his ground. He really stood his ground on a lot of things. And I know it was hard. I know it was hard.
Absolutely. And that's the lesson, really, is to stand your ground. When you see things that aren't right, say something. Don't be the one who's exacerbating a situation. You can stand up and speak out loud and say, this is what I'm going to take. Having grown up in a big city, well, did you grow up in Chicago on the north side, you said?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
having grown up in a big city, and I did too, I really didn't, from my white perspective, see racism, right?
Mhm.
And I think there's a misnomer that when big cities don't, if you live in a big city, you don't experience racism like you would growing up in Mississippi, for example.
Mhm.
Was that the case for you?
Well, I know for my mother, since she was so distant from her family, and then when they moved from Mississippi to Chicago, she stayed away from them so much that I didn't really get the chance to know them. Like till this day, there's some cousins and people that I don't know of my family, because my mother didn't want to get so close to them because they were so against, with her and my father.
Right.
So my family basically was people on the north. So that's why I never really got into the racism part until that day when my dad, we went to the bank. And then after that, in high school a little bit. But when I was growing up and going to school, it was it was all cultures, it was all races
Yeah.
within the school, and they didn't bother me. I didn't bother them. We all was getting along. Everybody always say, well, Barbara, you're in that bubble. You're in that little bubble. You want everybody to love each other, everybody to hug each other. I said, because that's how I grew up
Yeah.
to a certain point. And now I'm seeing a whole different phase when I got older. It's like, in my mind, I'm like, okay, wait a minute. When did all this happen? Did this person know like me because of this? And it's like it was just like a whole nother world, and I didn't like it. And I didn't like it at
No.
all. But
And you were in corporate for a long time. What kind of things did you see there in terms of, covert, overt, either way, in terms of racism?
well, the thing with that was going, because I always believe in education. Building your skills, going to school, learning, all that stuff. So when I started in the insurance industry, I wanted to learn everything because I said, okay, if I want to be really good at this, I need to understand the ins and outs of insurance. And it was in the commercial field of it. So I started in a small little insurance agency to one of the big insurance carriers, and now I'm with the number one brokerage right now. And I told myself, I said, I got to go to school. I got to get my degree.
Right.
I already had it in my head what I needed to do. And my mother kept saying, because at that time my father passed, she said, you got to go to school. If you want to be better, you got to get, she said over and over again. So I went and got my bachelor's degree. I got an associate degree. And, then I was really learning a lot on the job to the point where I was going to go for, to get promoted. So I would go for it. And then it seemed like every time I would go for the position, there was one thing that was missing. Oh, Bar, we love you. You're awesome with this and that. But there's one thing you still need. I'm like, okay, what do I need? And they said, you need some insurance background in this. And so I said, okay, I'll get it. And that's how I was. I was like, you tell me what I need.
Yeah.
I'll go get it. I'll take the time, spend the money, what I have to do. I went for one position 19 times, Trish, 19 times. And it was a management role, it was a supervisor role. And every time I went, it was something. So at the last one, I said, you know what? I want to ask this question to the interviewer. And I said, I just want to know, it seemed like I have everything. And every time you tell me to go get something that I need to add, I don't go do it. What is the problem? And they looked at me and they said, it's an image thing, Barbara, and just work on that. This is an image thing. Within, and I said, at that point in time, Trish, I said, you know what? I'm done. I'm done. I'm not going to keep going. I felt like I was just hitting this brick wall over and over and over. And I said, you know what? Anything I do now, as far as learning skills, I am going to work on building my own. And that's what started the whole thing with the Diamond Factor and just, saying, and I said, told myself, I said, I never want any woman, especially a woman, to feel like they don't have a value. And that's why I'm so on the PPD, that's all we call it, purpose, passion, and drive, because it's so important. It is so important.
Wow. 19 times. Well, you know what? They call it an image thing, but here's here's my reality. I worked in corporate America and I was a manager and I had a voice in who would get promoted next. And I've told this story before. There was a woman that was great. She was great, but there was always something. There was always one, exactly what you're saying. It was always something, and someone else would get promoted instead of her. And finally, she said to me, we got together, and I was like, I'm sorry, it didn't work out this time. She goes, it's never going to work out. I'm like, what are you talking about? She goes, every single time it comes down to something you can't even see. And I was like, what? Like what? I said, it was this time, and it was this the last time, and it was this the time before that. She goes, it's always been because I'm Black. You cannot see that that's the reason. You'll never see it because you're a white woman. And she got through to me. Like, just telling this story, whenever I tell this story, Anna Thomas, if you ever hear this, it's you I'm talking about. And I've actually tried to find her, but it gives me chills when I talk about it because I just couldn't see it. And that's so true for so many of us who were socialized as white. We don't see ourselves as racist. Yet when, there's a Black man walking behind you at night, are you not a little nervous wanting to cross the street? Right? So this stuff that we've been ingrained with, Barbara, they just don't know. And that's really the whole point of these conversations.
Yeah. And then it's good to have these so people can really understand. But, one thing that I have to say, Trish, is everything that, I dealt with being a Black woman, being from the age of 10 when I told you with the whole thing. And then now, I always will have hope that us is white, Black, Puerto Rican, and especially as women, because this is WPN, that we come together and we start that fire to keep moving, to say there's hope that we can all just be equal and just treat each other, a certain way. So because people sometimes say, well, Barbara, that was bad. I know you went through all that. Or, wow, you went through this when you were younger. Aren't you having that little I just hate you? It's like, no, that will never occur. I fight for both races. I fight for the Black, because even some of my Black sisters were against me when I was younger, because it was funny, because I was in a world of, okay, you have white people saying one thing, and then I went, because I went to high school, which my mother and father got divorced. We moved to the south side of Chicago, and then it was mostly Black people. So then I had to wind up going to a Black high school, which I hated it because I was so used to going to school with all minorities.
Right.
And then they yelled at me and looked at me like I was crazy, because they said this thing which I'll never understand. Well, you talk white, or you talk too proper, or you think you're all that. I'm like, okay, I'm fighting with you now too, really?
Yeah.
So, and then so I told myself, I said, you know what, I can't let that stop me from feeling the way I feel inside, and what my dad kept telling me over and over again. So that's why I always tell people when we're having these conversations, let's don't just give up just because we're dealing with all this. We need to have that hope and keep fighting that fight to say, okay, we need to be, we're equal, and treat each other equal and love each other.
Yeah.
That's all, that's what we have to do.
Yes, yes, yes. And that's the whole point is for those of you who've been with us, thank you for sticking it out and for staying with us and hearing this conversation. And I really urge you to comment on it below. Tell us your thoughts about this conversation. Tell us your thoughts about, what's come up for you as we're having this conversation, because the reality is the only way that we can change the only way we can change the fact that there is racism is for us to have these conversations, to grow and learn. I have learned so much simply by talking with my sisters every week for the last 6 months. I've learned so much about microaggressions, like that whole, and you get it from both sides, that whole thing, you talk too proper. From the white end, you'll hear, where did you go to school that you talk like that, right? As if you're not supposed to be able to talk like that. So keep having these conversations, ladies and gents. Thank you so much, Barbara Beckley,
Thank
for
you.
sharing your experience. Thank you all for watching. And really, give us some comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and then have these conversations among your friends, at your family. It's just a matter of opening it up and thinking about, what has who was your Anna back in my day? It was someone who had the guts to tell me it's because I'm
Mm.
Black. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you so much for letting me be on this platform. And I wish you and your sisters so much. My sisters.
Yes. Tell everybody where they can get the Diamond Factor Experience show.
Oh, yes, definitely. Please. The Diamond Factor Experience, it's a Facebook group. And the show that I have, Diamond Factor Experience with Barbara Beckley, comes on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And you can go to www.e360tv.com and watch it on those days in the morning from Central Time, 8 to 9 o'clock.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Barbara Beckley. We will see you again next week with another fun conversation, and appreciate all of you being here with us today.